Starting things off, number 10, we have Robert Elton Harris. He said, "You can be a king or a street sweeper, but everyone dances with the Grim Reaper." He was arrested on July 5th of 1978 when him and his brother hijacked a car with 2 teenage boys in it. They ordered them to drive to a remote location where the brothers brutally murdered them, and then they used the vehicle as a getaway car when they robbed a San Diego bank. Robert Harris was arrested just 1 hour after the robbery, and he was charged with murder and auto theft, kidnapping, burglary, and bank robbery. One of the arresting officers was the father of one of the murdered boys, but he didn't realize that the victim was his son until later. He wasn't even able to recognize his son's face. That's how violent the murder was. Robert Harris was sentenced to death in 1979. After many appeals, he was finally executed in San Quentin's gas chamber on April 21st, 1992. Moving up this list with George Engel in at number 9. He was an anarchist who didn't like to follow any sort of rules or regulations. He was involved with a lot of activism and protests in the Chicago area. A protest bombing took place in Haymarket Square in Chicago that resulted in the death of 7 police officers, 4 civilians, and a lot of other people who were seriously injured. George Engel was actually at home playing cards while this riot broke out, and he was arrested the next day and charged with conspiracy in the bombings. He was convicted and sentenced to hanging, but before he took his last breath, he said, "Hurrah for anarchy. This is the happiest moment of my life." Roger Keith Coleman makes his last statement in at number 8. His case gained nationwide attention and major controversy because he maintained his innocence the whole time during his conviction and even right before he was executed. During his final last words, he said, "An innocent man is going to be murdered tonight. When my innocence is proven, I hope Americans will realize the injustice of the death penalty as all other civilized countries have." He was convicted in Virginia for assaulting and murdering his sister-in-law on the day that he has been laid off from work. After his death, the DNA evidence was reanalyzed, and in January 2006, the governor announced that the testing of the DNA evidence has conclusively proven that he was guilty of the crime. Okay, that's great and all, but why don't you think you should have done 1,000 tests on the DNA before you executed him? It makes no sense. What if the DNA evidence proved that he wasn't guilty? What would the press conference look like then? Oops, we made a massive mistake and killed an innocent man. My bad. And now at number 7, we have Timothy McVeigh. He infamously said, "I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul." If you guys remember, he was the one behind the Oklahoma City bombing, which killed 168 people and injured over 680 others. This bombing is actually the deadliest act of domestic terrorism in the United States. His execution date was set for June 11, 2001, and he made a request to have it publicly televised, but this motion was denied. He invited a composer to perform classical music on the night of his execution, and he requested to have a Catholic chaplain. He also requested 2 pints of mint chocolate chip ice cream as his last meal. He was executed by lethal injection, and his wait to be executed was way shorter than most inmates waiting on death row. He only spent about 4 years on death row, while most inmates spend an average of 15 years. The infamous Jeffrey Dahmer is next up at number 6. He was sentenced to 15 consecutive life terms for murdering 17 men and boys in the Milwaukee area, and this is between 1978 and 1991. He was also heavily into necrophilia, and he kept his victims' body parts in the freezer so that he can just eat them later. The interesting part of this story is that Jeffrey Dahmer wasn't given the death penalty. His inmate actually beat him to death because he said that Jeffrey Dahmer was a sick and creepy man. And yeah, he was. He used to make this person food look like human body parts, and he would cover them in ketchup to resemble blood. So according to Jeffrey Dahmer's murderer, his last words were, "I don't care if I live or die, go ahead and kill me." And now at number 5, we have Tom Blackjack Ketchum. He was an outlawed cowboy who murdered someone in 1895. After that, his gang fled to New Mexico, where they committed more robberies before he was captured during an unsuccessful attempt to rob a train. He was quickly arrested, put on trial, found guilty, and sentenced to death by hanging. When his execution date arrived, it was the biggest public display in the area because he was the first person to be hanged for a train robbery in New Mexico. However, things didn't go as smoothly as they hoped. Before he was hanged, he said this: "I'll be in hell before you start breakfast, boys, let her rip." And right after that, he said the rope completely decapitated him, and it is said that his headless body landed on its feet and stayed standing upright for quite some time. John Wayne Gacy had 3 famous last words, and this comes into number 4. He kept it short and sweet when he said, "Kiss my ass." I don't know about you guys, but I think I would have, a lot more to say for my final words than "kiss my ass." But then again, he was a textbook serial killer who didn't really have any emotions. He was known as the Killer Clown because he used to dress up as Pogo the Clown and perform at many charitable events and birthday parties. He took the lives of at least 33 young boys in Illinois, and he would bury their bodies underneath his home. So when he was convicted of sexual assault in 1968, the police were able to find all of the dead bodies that he tried to cover up. Despite a bunch of corpses being found underneath his own home, he maintained his innocence. But he was found guilty in 1980 because there was just so much compelling evidence against him. He was given multiple death penalties and life sentences, and finally, after being on death row for 14 years, he was executed by lethal injection. Aileen Wuornos is up next at number 3. Aileen had a terrible childhood that was full of abuse and abandonment, so it's almost no surprise that she went on a killing rampage that would define her as America's most infamous female serial killer. She worked as a prostitute, and she killed 7 men that picked her up along the highway. Aileen said that all of her murderers were out of self-defense, but she was also convicted and sentenced to death for 6 of the murders. She was executed by lethal injection on October 9, 2002, but before she died, she said this: "I just like to say I'm sailing with the rock, and I'll be back like Independence Day with Jesus, June the 6th. Like the movie, big mothership of all, I'll be back." I don't even know what this even means, but I am pretty scared. And June 6th, what happens on June 6th? Carl Panzram's last words makes it onto this list at number 2. You probably don't recognize his name, but he is actually known as one of the most sadistic American serial killers of all time. He had more than a dozen aliases, and no one knew anything about what he has done for years until he was captured in November 1928. Before his death, he confessed to killing 21 people and sexually harming 1,000 males. Is this real life right now? And right before he was hanged, he said, "In my lifetime, I have murdered 21 human beings. I have committed thousands of burglaries, robberies, larcenies, arsons, and last but not least, I have committed sodomy on more than 1,000 male human beings." That is just sickening, and for all those reasons, I'm not the least bit sorry for this guy. The Vampire of Dusseldorf falls onto our list at number 1. He is known as a vampire because he would occasionally attempt to drink the blood from his victims' wounds while they were still alive. But eventually he was arrested and sentenced to death by beheading because he committed a series of murders and sexual assaults. He even admitted to killing a 9-year-old girl. It is confirmed that he murdered at least 9 people, but the police suspected that he brutally murdered a lot more people. So one evening before his death, he ordered a Wiener Schnitzel, a bottle of white wine, and fried potatoes, and the next morning he was taken to the guillotine to have his head chopped off. But before he left this world, he made one last scary statement that probably haunted the people that were at his execution. He said, "Tell me, after my head has been chopped off, will I still be able to hear, at least for a moment, the sound of my own blood gushing from the stump of my head? That would be a pleasure to end all pleasures." I mean, yeah, after hearing that, I'm definitely gonna have nightmares, and if that wasn't enough, his mummified head is on display right now in a Wisconsin museum after doctors tried to cut it open to find reasons behind his evil. I mean, you can't make this stuff up.
Coming in at number 10, we have The Ring. A paramedic on Reddit said that they were riding in the back of an ambulance with someone who had just been in a serious car accident. They were losing a lot of blood but still conscious, and it seemed that they were going to make it to the hospital. The last thing that the person said to them was, "Take the ring out of my pocket." It wasn't long after that this person flatlined before they were even able to make it back to the ER. The paramedic didn't go fishing through their pockets to find this ring because, for one, that is illegal and it morally feels very strange. But they never got to find out why this person wanted them to take this ring off of them. There was the chance that they had some sort of head injury from the crash and that they couldn't clearly comprehend where they were. Or maybe it was some sort of family heirloom and this person knew that they didn't have anyone to pass it on to. Maybe they didn't want something so precious to be buried in the ground with them and they thought it should have been passed on to the person who was trying to save their life. And guys, make sure you hit that like button because it really helps us out. Coming at number 9, we have There's Nothing There. Reddit user GunMedic15 said that they had just picked up someone who was going into cardiac arrest. They got them into the back of the ambulance while they were still conscious and they hooked them up to the EKG monitor so he could check out what was going on with his heartbeat. He saw that he was going into a lethal rhythm, and that sounds like the title of an R&B album from the 90s, but it basically means your heart can't pump blood properly and you're starting to drift off, and if you don't fix it, you're going to die. Well, this man had enough blood circulating in him to say one last thing before he went. The only thing he said was, "But I don't see a light," and then he was gone. The paramedic tried to bring him back, but he was unable to save his life. We like to think we know what's on the other side, but we really have no clue what happens to us when we die. Coming in at number 8, we have Are You in Any Pain? You have to ask these questions as a paramedic. Now, if you're on the other end of this and you clearly are in a lot of pain, this could seem like a dumb question, but it's just the other party doing their job. That being said, if you're about to die, say whatever you want because nothing matters and we are alone in the universe. So a paramedic talked about when they were tending to someone who had just been stabbed. When he first got there, he said, "Are you in any pain?" And the man said, "Yes, I'm in pain. What the hell do you think? I was just stabbed." The man didn't live very much longer, but at least he went out without holding anything back. I think some of us would rather fake not dying so we don't inconvenience the paramedic with trying to save our life. Coming in number 7, we have the overdose. A paramedic shows up at the scene after someone calls about an overdose. They rushed in to help the person. They were still semi-conscious. They had just taken too much of an opioid and they were drifting off pretty quickly. This person was clearly an addict for quite some time. You could tell by their body that they were wasting away, which was going to make it so much harder to save their life. As the paramedics were putting this person onto the gurney, they said, "I'm scared," then they drifted off. They did everything they could to try and keep this person alive, but there was no luck. It must have been heart-wrenching to have someone in that moment who's looking to you for help and is so frightened. They would just want your help, and it would be so hard to tell them what's going on without making them more afraid. Coming in number 6, we have What's Worth Your Time. An elderly man was being transported to the hospital by 2 paramedics in the back of an ambulance. He was starting to slip away. He was going into cardiac arrest. He turned to one of the paramedics and he said, "I spent too much time vacuuming," and then he drifted off and died. I think that's something that would probably be ringing in all of our minds when we're about to go. What did we really spend our life on? I hope that when I'm going, I don't have negative feelings about how I spent my life. As of right now, I think I'm doing a pretty good job. Coming in number 5, we have Stay Positive. A man in his early 30s was in a terrible car accident. The way that it was described in the Reddit thread was that he didn't have much of a chance surviving even if he was in the emergency room when it happened. They didn't go into detail about what that means, but I'm sure you can tell that it's not good. The man was still conscious as he was being rushed to the ER, so he took his time to ask the paramedic about what was going on with his body. He wanted to know the extent of his injuries. The paramedic gave him a full breakdown, the best he could in this stressful moment, and the man who was about to die said, "At least it's not raining." If you're about to go and you can feel your life slipping away, I guess you could be scared, or you could be happy and just hope that whatever is waiting for you on the other side will be something that's even nicer than what you got to experience on this side. I hope that more people feel that kind of security as they're passing on to the other side, no matter what the situation is. Coming in at number 4, we have skydiving. Some people who seem healthy can have some pretty serious medical issues. Reddit user Reddit Owns My Life talked about the last words they heard from a guy who seemed pretty healthy on the surface, but this man had an unstable heart arrhythmia. Basically, when his heart was beating, it wasn't doing a good enough job, so he wasn't getting enough oxygen passed around through his body. This would cause him to pass out, and most people don't survive with this for very long. This man with the heart problem in this story described the feeling of going in and out of consciousness as the same feeling you get when you jump out of a plane when you're skydiving. The paramedic said the guy passed out right in front of him, and before he did, he said, "Are you going to take me skydiving again?" And that was the last thing that this man ever said. Coming in at number 3, we have Not Ready. The whole concept of death is so terrifying because we have no idea what happens. That's why we come up with so many things like religion, astrology, or simulation theory. All of these things are supposed to give us the answer to the unknown. Religion tells tells us what happens after you die and how you're supposed to live your life. Astrology tells you who you are and why other people are the way that they are, and simulation theory tries to tell us how the universe and reality was created. But really, we don't have the answer to any of these questions, and no matter where you put your faith, when your final moments come, you will most likely feel an overwhelming feeling of insecurity. That is what happened in this experience when this paramedic arrived on the scene after an old woman had had a heart attack. She was still conscious, but she could feel herself fading. She kept saying over and over, "I don't want to die." The paramedic said he could still hear her voice in his head. She didn't make it much longer in the ambulance before she passed away. Coming in number 2, we have a dying secret. In your last moments, if you have anything you want to get off your chest, you better do it right then and there, because there is literally no other time you can do it. Just make sure that you are for sure going to die, because you don't want to let all your dirty secrets out and then find out you're going to live. Ooh, that would be embarrassing. Well, this paramedic heard someone's last words that were both incriminating and mysterious. They had loaded someone into the back of the ambulance after they were shot. They were hit a few times, so it didn't look like they were going to make it. This guy had enough energy to ask the paramedic if he thought he was going to live, and he finished the sentence with, "Please be honest with me." The paramedic told him the truth, that there was a good chance he wouldn't. So this man, with his final words, said, "I committed many crimes throughout the 80s. Then he went into a little bit of detail, and he also said, "No one ever caught me." Then he drifted off and died. Now, when you hear something like that, you have no idea if it's the truth. Did this guy just say that to freak out the paramedic as one final sick joke? Or did he get what he needed off his chest, but he didn't give enough information to finish solving the puzzle? And coming at the number 1 spot, we have F.U. Many of you watching know all about Tupac. He was one of the most influential musicians of his time and is still respected as one of the best rappers to this day. I wonder what his opinion of the rap game would be when he saw all of these people with their colored dreads talking about taking too much Xanax and rapping about Heelys. Remember when black people made the blues and then eventually white people turned it into glam rock? I think that's what's happening to the rap game right now. But back to talking about Tupac, he has some of the most famous last words in history. Tupac was shot on the Vegas Strip, and in his last moments, an officer and a paramedic were trying to help him. The officer asked him who shot him, and Tupac responded with "F.U." I think you can imagine that he didn't say "F.U." He was one of the hardest people of his time, and he was about to die. I don't think he was really going to censor himself in his final moments. But even though that would have been amazing to find out who shot the rapper, it's nice to go out like a badass.
Starting off this list, in our number 10 spot, we have Michael Ney. Michael Ney was a first Duke, and he was the first Prince of the Moskva, and was a French military commander in the French Revolutionary Wars, as well as the Napoleonic Wars. He was even one of the original 18 marshals of the empire that Napoleon I created. After Napoleon was dethroned and exiled in 1815, however, Michael was arrested and tried by the Chamber of Peers for treason. When the verdict was given, 137 peers voted for the death penalty, 17 voted for deportation, 5 abstained, and there was 1 single vote for acquittal. Unfortunately, this was a majority rules situation, and Michael was sentenced to death by the firing squad. On December 7th, 1815, Michael was put in front of a firing squad, and he refused to wear a blindfold. He was surprisingly given the right to order the fire himself, and before doing so, these are the final words that he spoke. "Soldiers, when I give the command to fire, fire straight at my heart. Wait for the order. It will be my last to you. I protest against my condemnation. I have fought 100 battles for France, and not one against her. Soldiers, fire." I couldn't imagine having to be the one to order your own death, especially when you don't want to die, so this one definitely leaves quite an eerie feeling. In our number 9 spot today, we have Pompey the Great. Before I dive into this one, guys, please don't forget to hit the thumbs up button if you're enjoying the video so far, because it really helps us out. Pompey the Great is the oldest person on this list, as he was born in 106 BC and passed away in 48 BC at the age of 57. Pompey was a Roman general, and his career played a significant role in the evolution from a republic to an empire. At one point, he was an ally of Julius Caesar, but they became enemies, and this is what led to Pompey's death. In 48 BC, there was a civil war in which Caesar beat Pompey's army, and Pompey began to retreat to Egypt. Once he got there, he hoped that King Ptolemy would help him, but unfortunately the king feared Caesar, so instead the king invited him ashore at Pelusium, and it was there that Pompey was assassinated. Pompey's final words were to one of the assassins, and it seems as though Pompey recognized him. He said, "I am not mistaken, surely, in believing you to have been formerly my fellow soldier. Certainly being assassinated is never good, but by people you know and possibly trusted is definitely quite a dark twist." In our number 8 spot today we have Sir Philip Sidney. Sir Philip Sidney was born in November of 1554 and was an English poet and soldier and is one of the most prominent figures of the Elizabethan era. In 1586 he joined Sir John Norris in the Battle of Zutphen. Sorry if I said that wrong, in the fight against the Spanish, but it was during this battle that he was shot in the thigh, which would ultimately lead to his death. One of the most well-known stories about Sir Philip Sidney is when he was laying wounded next to another soldier who was also wounded. He spoke his last words to the other soldier when he was giving him his water. He said, "Take it. Thy need is greater than mine." It seems as though he must have known he was about to pass, but it also shows the kind of person he was, which seems to be a very noble person. He certainly left a legacy considering we are still here talking about him today. In our number 7 spot today we have Joachim Murat. Joachim Murat was a marshal of the Empire and an admiral to Napoleon, and he was also the king of Naples from 1808 to 1815. A lot of people attribute his titles to the fact that he actually married Napoleon's younger sister, Caroline Bonaparte, but he is also remembered as brave and charismatic. He was also known as a fancy dresser, so he gained the nickname the Dandy King, which I love. After the fall of Napoleon, he was captured by the forces of King Ferdinand IV of Naples and was eventually tried and sentenced to death by firing squad. When the time came, he refused a chair and a blindfold and said, "I have braved death too often to fear it." He then stood up tall and proudly and kissed a carving of the face of his wife that he had with him, and then he spoke his final words, which were, "Soldiers, do your duty, straight to the heart but spare the face. Fire." Honestly, I don't know how these people stay so calm and collected during these undoubtedly terrifying moments. In our number 6 spot today we have Major Lloyd Williams. Major Lloyd Williams was born in 1887 and was an officer in the United States Marine Corps and passed away fighting in World War I. On June 11th of 1918 he was leading an assault and had been sent to help the French army in the Battle of Belleau Wood, which barely left anyone on their side alive. When they first arrived, they found the French retreating already, but Lloyd did not want to. When a French major told Lloyd to retreat, he told him to go to hell, which I guess I can appreciate. Later in the battle, Lloyd found himself gassed and injured by shrapnel and was down on the battlefield, severely injured. When medics approached him, he spoke his last words, which were, "Don't bother with me, take care of my good men." I obviously have no knowledge of what would have happened if they did choose to retreat when the French major suggested it, but I definitely think it is honorable that he ensured his men were tended to first. In our number 5 spot today we have Murray Hudson. Murray Hudson was born in 1938 and was a sergeant with the Royal New Zealand Infantry Regiment. On February 13th, 1974, Murray was a drill instructor and was supervising a training exercise when things really took a turn for the worst. One of the officers in training, or a non-commissioned officer who was participating in this training exercise, accidentally armed a grenade that he was about to throw. This is obviously an incredibly frightening situation and one that made the officer completely freeze. After all, what really do you do in that situation? Murray saw him freeze and realized what had happened and ordered him to throw it, which I guess is the smartest move and the thing that you would do in this situation. The officer unfortunately was still frozen and wasn't reacting, so in an attempt to save him, Murray went over and took his hand and tried to release the grenade so that he could throw it. During this process, the grenade unfortunately exploded, which took both of their lives. The final words of Murray were his directions and him saying, "Throw it, just throw it." Such a tragic event that absolutely could have been avoided. Murray was awarded the George Cross after his passing, which is the highest award bestowed by the British government for gallantry not in the presence of an enemy. In our number 4 spot today, we have Louis Joseph de Montcalm. Louis Joseph was a French soldier who was born in 1712 and was commander of the forces in North America during the 7 Years' War. In September of 1759, he decided to attack the British with the forces he had instead of waiting for more people and more numbers. Many people believed that this was his greatest mistake, but he felt like if he waited, they wouldn't have been able to defeat the British. That may be true, but without waiting, the British of course still defeated the French forces. Louis was riding back to the city when he was struck by a musket shot in the back. There were 3 soldiers who helped him back to the city and to a surgeon who explained that he wouldn't be able to even make it through the night. Before his commanding officers left him for the last time, he had some not so nice words for them. His final words happened to be, "I have much business that must be attended to of greater moment than your ruined garrison and this wretched country." Considering he's talking about the country that I live in, that seems a little rude, but I can understand why he felt that way. In our number 3 spot today, we have Simon Bolivar. Simon, who is often referred to as the Liberator, was born in 1783 and was a military and political leader that led Venezuela, Bolivia, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, and Panama to their independence from the Spanish Empire. He was 47 years old in 1830 and had resigned from his presidency and was planning on heading to Europe. He even had already sent crates of his belongings, but unfortunately fell extremely ill before he was able to leave his country. On December 17th of 1830, he was about to lose his battle with tuberculosis and was extremely delirious, so his last words are actually very strange. There are some accounts that his last words were, "Damn it, how will I ever get out of this labyrinth?" And other accounts say that his final words were, "Fetch the luggage, they do not want us here." Truthfully, either way, it is clear that he wasn't necessarily in his right mind, but it's also very clear that he was looking for some way out or some sort of escape. In our number 2 spot today, we have John Sedgwick. John Sedgwick was born in 1813 and was a military officer and Union Army general during the American Civil War. On May 9, 1864, he and his men were at the Spotsylvania courthouse and he was directing different placements when Confederate sharpshooters, who were around 1,000 yards away, began shooting at them. This of course caused for some of John's men to duck for cover like any regular human being would when being shot at. I'm not exactly sure why, but John seemed to have been less concerned with the shots and more concerned with the soldiers taking cover, and he continued to strut around and say, "I'm ashamed of you. They couldn't hit an elephant at this distance." It was unfortunately just a few moments later that he was fatally struck by a bullet just under his left eye. His chief of staff, Martin T. McMahon, was close to him and heard his last words and tried to catch him as he fell. Medical personnel were of course called as quickly as possible, but unfortunately he never regained consciousness. In our number 1 spot today, we have Alexander Prokhorenko. In 2016, Alexander was a senior lieutenant with the Special Armed Forces of the Russian Armed Forces. He was 25 years old at the time and was fighting in the Syrian Civil War. On March 17th of 2016, during the Palmyra offensive, he found himself surrounded by ISIS militants. Not wanting to be captured alive and also bravely doing what he thought was best, he ordered an airstrike on his location. His command was slightly confused in the beginning of this order and asked him to confirm his order, and this is when Alexander spoke his final words to command. He said, "They are outside. This is the end, Commander. Thank you. Tell my family and my country I love them. Tell them I was brave and I fought until I could no longer. Please take care of my family. Avenge my death. Goodbye, Commander. Tell my family I love them." Alexander left behind his wife Katya and the child they were expecting at the time of his death. He was nicknamed the Russian Rambo after his death and was awarded the title Hero of the Russian Federation for his ultimate sacrifice.